Ladies and gentlemen, Hal Blake.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I work for Ovum, who are a industry analyst organisation. So we look at what's happening in the technology space, and my particular focus is public sector, so government, health and education. So this morning, I feel like almost like saying, and all of the above, because we've had two fantastic presentations here about what ABSN and DWP are doing in the areas of open data and privacy, or open data and taking account of privacy, I guess. I'm going to speak to that, but from a more general perspective of what's happening in the industry, what's happening in government, what the drivers are, and what we can do about that. So a lot of it is going to reinforce what these two gentlemen have already said, but I think that's because they're doing such a great job. So the agenda this morning: open data. Why on earth are we doing it? What's it all about? Then we open it, and we've got another whole pile of problems. Should we be opening it? And if we open it, how do we make people get to it? And what can we do to achieve the potential of the open data environment, not just for our organisations and not just for companies who hopefully are going to make a profit out of it, but hey, let's be good about this, for the whole benefit of society. I like to think we're doing something that's worthwhile. So, open data benefits. Here's the first one. I don't know if anyone recognises Don Chipp, but I think his most famous thing that Don Chipp ever did was say, what are we here for? To keep the bastards honest. And that's at least one function of open data. It's about knowing what government is doing. It's about knowing what government is doing with our money, or about what they are doing, from a policy point of view. So if you like, that's benefit A. I suspect that politicians most of the time regard that as maybe it's a benefit, maybe it's not. Depends whether it's the opposition's information you're trying to get or whether it's your own information. Everyone seems to change their view depending on what position they are in the power structure at the time. But that's benefit A, is about exposing the workings and the operations of government to the population that pays for those workings. In a democracy, that's a good thing. Now, having worked on the other side of the fence as a senior public servant for a decade, sometimes that doesn't always seem like such a good thing when you've actually got to explain to the people in the room what the latest disaster was about, but it's a good thing from a democratic point of view. But that's not the thing that I'm going to talk about this morning, because really the benefit that we're interested in this room is not the benefit about exposing the workings of government to daylight. That's a good thing. It's the second benefit of open data, which is really about we can make use of it. Okay, we as an organisation, as a community, can make use of it. And there's a couple of points here. You can see I've got, and I apologise if the font's too small up at the back, but 2013, the G8 leaders, big countries in the world, signed an open data charter. You can see down the bottom, the G20, which is a slightly bigger group of slightly smaller countries, they also pledged an open data charter. They pledged to use open data to advance against corruption in government. And you can see in the middle there's a quote there from the Business Spectator in 2014 that said, it's potentially a multi-trillion-dollar benefit that can be achieved out of open data. Now, we've got statistics. The room's full of statisticians, So you guys will know as much as I do that you can manipulate statistics and graphs any way you like and get any outcome you care to desire. But the fact of the matter is, this is just some estimates behind that McKinsey survey. The interesting thing is, right, they put a huge kind of range there between 3 billion and 5 billion, and this is US data only. But hey, even if it's 3 billion, and even if they're 50% out, that's that's 1.5 billion, and to my mind, that's a lot of benefit. All right, so take the figures with a pinch of salt, take the graph with a pinch of salt, but the fact of the matter is we're talking millions, hundreds of millions, and potentially billions of benefit in exposing data that already exists, getting it out to the outside world, and getting people the opportunity to use it, manipulate it, think about it, link it up with other things. There's a survey called the Open Data Barometer, which is a worldwide survey, and it looks at 86 countries around the world, and it assesses them for their adoption of open data principles. And in fact, the second edition of this barometer came out earlier, 2015. You can find it online. Just Google Open Data Barometer if you're interested. Some stats that jump out of that: 8% of countries they surveyed published data on government spending. I find that's pretty low, 6% on government contracts, 3% open data from company ownership, 7% of countries release data on health services, and I know we've got a few people from various health-related industries in the room, and 12% provide figures on education. I don't know about you, I find those pretty low. Now those are worldwide averages, or basically they're averages of 86 countries, which is 100 short of the total countries in the world. So there are some that score a big fat 0. You can see on the you'd be very proud of that one, mate. Is that DWP just up there? So you can see the UK tops the list. US comes second, all the usual suspects there. Australia sneaks in at number 10, okay, which, isn't that bad considering there's 3 G8 nations who, if you remember, the G8 said, yeah, we're going to do this open data thing, it's a good thing we commit to it. Japan, Italy and Russia don't even make it in the top 10. So, Australia's mark, yeah, pretty good, but could do better, I think, in, the kind of global scale. I'm sure, ABS is probably there, but other people are down there. The other thing to take into account with this, of course, is statisticians in the room. It's a average for the whole country. So there will be organisations that are better, there are organisations that are worse. There are states that are doing better, there are states that aren't doing so well. So, don't think that it's an absolute empirical value down to the last decimal point. It's an indication of where things are at. We'll be aware that in response to these G8, G20 type things, most national governments have started an open data, a data publishing kind of construct. Top right, we've got the UK government, data.gov.au. Obviously, most people in the room will be, data.gov.uk. Most people will be familiar with data.gov.au, which is the Commonwealth statistics, and data.gov, which is the US equivalent. And published data sets, I just stole these off the web the other day. So these are the Australian ones. You see, there's currently nearly 7,500 data sets at the national level. The challenge is, of course, is those data sets are all incredibly variable. The fact a data set gets in there may mean it's just an Excel spreadsheet that someone's dumped out and gone, here's an Excel spreadsheet, or it may be something much more comprehensive and more useful. Excel spreadsheet, better than nothing at all, but I think we can all realise that really the game has moved on from that. That's the previous model of data publishing, and we should be looking for something that's far more dynamic and far more usable. So quite obviously this isn't just restricted to national governments. You'll all be aware that the state governments have their open data policies. There's Data New South Wales, there's Queensland government, there's Victoria, and also down to the city level. There's a Melbourne data repository. And of course, city data is particularly interesting because in many ways, it's the closest data to the citizen. So it really often reflects delivery of services, number of stray dogs, whether the bins were collected on time, things that are really close to the average citizen in the street going, well, is my life getting better or worse and why? So very interesting that cities are adopting open data policies. So who's interested? Why should we care? Did you spot it? Yeah, you see, got my slides up to date. So Big Malk, he's a big fan of open data. In fact, we were discussing this before the presentation this morning. What are the shenanigans in Canberra last night going to mean for data, IT, communications, the NBN, for goodness sake. Oh, that better not go on the camera, had it? But yeah, there's going to be some big changes, quite obviously. But leaving politics aside, Malcolm is a fan of open data. He can see the benefit of it. I think there's going to be an even bigger push at the Commonwealth level and greater support for opening government, getting the data out there. So if we accept that politicians and governments are in favour of this, who else thinks this is a good idea? Well, the general public generally do. They're interested in the stuff, and the fact that both ABS and DWP have said that they get queries from people all over the community saying, I want to know about this, I want to know about that, I'd like to slice and dice this and see what it means. There's a whole ecosystem of developers of online services or additional services that are going to pull that data in. And obviously there are people that are researching in specific fields, whether it be health or whether it be education or whether it be the economy, who need that data to actually carry out their research. So if we're going to have open data, this was a little quote that I got from the opendata.org, and the key thing is, and I think this is why we start to see that we're moving past the let's throw out a spreadsheet and hope someone can find it view of the world, is really for the data to be open in a modern environment. It's got to be published in bulk, it's got to be machine readable, and it's got to be an open license. But I think for me, the key differentiator is this in the middle. Machine readable, it doesn't need a human to go, oh no, hang on, the columns are the wrong way around, that one's got a decimal, that one hasn't, I've got to divide by this, because of course that slows everything down and that makes it a very manual process, and we're trying to get to insight that essentially isn't based on those manual analysis. So just pondering on what can we do with this data and what on earth is the benefit of this data, I thought that sort of the first wave of the use of open data was really applications that use what I'd like to call non-contentious data. All right, and the two obvious ones are transport and weather. Now, the interesting thing about the weather apps, and this is just a snapshot from my iPhone of a particular weather app that I like, is there's so many of them. How many weather apps are there? I don't know, 100, 200? They're all using the same data set. They're all getting the data from the Bureau of Meteorology. Have we got anyone from the Bureau here today? No? Okay. Because I know that they've got a lot of staff in Melbourne. But they're all using the same data set. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us the data set's really useful, really valuable, and is the key data for weather in Australia. It also tells us that there's a differentiated market in weather. So you can get weather that particularly appeals to cricket players, and you can get a weather app that particularly appeals to sailors, and you can get a weather app that particularly appeals to golfers. It's still the same data under the scenes. It's a presentational thing. And I think that's a really interesting insight, that essentially there's a segmented market there in what you're going to do with the data. I like this one because it gives really good wind data. And I'm a scuba diver, so wind is critical. Don't care about anything else, but if it's too windy, you can't dive. But other people love different apps for their weather data. And obviously, we've also got, this is one from the UK, we've also got the ubiquitous transport apps that basically munge all the timetables together and say, how can I get from here to here? I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago trying to get out of London back to Cheshire. It would have taken me days of looking at timetables and maps on the wall and writing things down, and I just said I want to go from here to here. Using all the up-to-date information from Transport for London, just puts it out. There's ones in Melbourne, there's ones in Canberra, there's ones everywhere. But of course the critical thing is apart from these being wonderful apps, and we've all got them and they work really well and aren't they fantastic, they really use data that is not sensitive. Yeah? Anyone could look at the timetable. The timetable's not secret. You could flick through the book, but we're just making it easier for you to consume. But there's no sensitivity around that information. There's generally not any sensitivity around the weather either. The weather's published. It's out there. This is the weather forecast. And if someone can use that data to make it more accessible in a way that you like, well, good on them. But they don't have to worry about, should I be telling anyone it's going to rain tomorrow? So what we're getting to now, and certainly these guys are dealing with now, is the more tricky stuff. The stuff where we are dealing with data. And to be honest, the weather and transport apps are fantastic. but they're almost the easy side of the equation. Now we get to the difficult stuff, which is health, social demographics, and those kind of things, policy things. And of course, as we've already heard, underneath that, right down as you drill down, you've got individual human beings. And quite rightly, in almost every jurisdiction, there's great concern about exposing the private information of individual human beings. But there's huge, whilst this is challenging and tricky to get this data out there and use it without compromising privacy, there are potentially some really powerful benefits for humanity. Wow, that sounds pretentious, doesn't it? But I particularly like this example. You may have heard of it before. The state of Indiana, and they've published it, so it's freely out there. The state of Indiana took a look at its infant mortality, which is much higher than surrounding states. In fact, it's one of the worst in the United States. And they looked at all the data they had. They had over 600 data sets on different things associated with socioeconomic group and health and all different things. And they'd previously used a kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to trying to get infant mortality down by just saying, oh, put $1 million in that hospital, or put $10 million into these drugs, or it's about mothers' education, or, you know, they all seemed like good ideas, but no one was able to actually kind of quantify whether they were worth doing. The interesting thing that popped out of this aggregation and this analysis of over 600 systems of government data that they already had was they pulled out that there were the top three risks to contributing to increased infant mortality, and those were inadequate prenatal care, whether the mother was involved in Medicaid, which is a sort of subsidy program for low-income mothers for healthcare, and the age of the mothers. 15 to 20-year-olds were far more likely to have problems with pregnancy. Now, all three of those, you might sit in the room and go, well, duh, I mean, all of them were things that had been considered, but they'd been considered amongst 200 other factors as well. And so by addressing those, they've actually started to significantly reduce I just realised I said significantly in a room full of statisticians, I have to watch that. They've started to substantially reduce that infant mortality in that state. Now, that couldn't have happened if they hadn't been able to join that data together from different systems. They still had to do it whilst maintaining the individual privacy of the individual mother. But I think what it illustrates is there are real benefits to society if we can get this right. So, if you're making your data open, firstly, is it accessible? And if it is accessible, should it be accessible? Ovum does a survey every year. It's called Enterprise Insights, and we survey about just over 5,000 enterprises every year for their strategies and their priorities for the coming year. This is the 14-15 data. The 15-16 is just being done as we speak, so that'll be published shortly. But and I apologise, it's an eye test at the top, so I'll tell you what it says. The two top trends for IT, as reported by senior IT executives last year for this year, was managing enterprise risk and security, number one, exploiting information for business insight, number two. So really the two things of we need to use the information, or we need to help people to use the information, but we need to keep it secure, are absolutely front and centre in our survey of IT executives. And as I say, the new data will be coming out shortly. So, as we've heard, you can put the data out there, but you can actually do it in such a way that you almost make sure no one can actually find it. I don't know if anyone's read through that, but this is a quote I love from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where he's trying to find the plans to show his house is going to be demolished. And he did find them. They're on display in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet, stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." So the plans are there, but you can't find them. And some of our early approaches to open data were really based on the fact of, it's another thing we've got to do. We've got to do open data. Someone's going to ask us whether we've done it. Put those spreadsheets out on the website. Yeah, we've done open data, now we can get on with our real jobs. There's a difference between saying we're going to lob it out there, hope someone finds it in the disused filing cabinet with the sign that says "Beware of the leopard," to saying we're going to make it easy for people to find, and then we're going to make it easy for people to use. So let's get the flip side. Every jurisdiction that I'm aware of, and certainly Australian government jurisdictions and state jurisdictions, all have restrictions and protocols around privacy. There's usually a commissioner in every state. There's certainly a commissioner in Victoria. There's the Office of the Information Commissioner in Canberra. So on the one hand, we're saying we need to get the data out there. We need people to have access to the data. But at the same time, we need to crack that nut of ensuring individual privacy. And I even came across a presentation from the Privacy Commissioner of the New South Wales Government, which he was actually speaking to the Open Data Forum, and it was a bit like, David going into the lion's den, or whatever your metaphor is, because essentially he's saying, well, is open data and privacy, are they mutually incompatible? Now, his take at the end of that speech is, no, they're not, but they certainly are challenging. So, when we talk about open data, I have mentioned the fact that early attempts were sort of placing spreadsheets out there saying we've complied. They were usually designed so that really the information couldn't be that sensitive anyway. I'm not sure about ABS, but a lot of organisations just dumped anything that was even remotely sensitive and didn't publish it. We've now got past that point because it's actually the sensitive information, and I'm talking about the health information, the social demographic information, that's potentially the most useful. So our option of saying, well, just don't publish that stuff is really very counterproductive, because that's the stuff that's actually going to make a difference. But it does have a cost, and it does have an overhead concern issue to be able to do this. So if we're going to publish our open data, and we're going to provide it, and we're hopefully going to allow people to analyse it, there's a number of criteria that we need to achieve. And that's why I was talking to Mike and asking him how close you were getting to real-time data. I know that real-time data is a nirvana, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't, continually be striving for it if we possibly can. There's a number of reasons for that, of course. I mean, obviously there's the fact that the end user likes to think, I've got the latest and greatest, and if someone made a call to the DWP 30 seconds ago, it's showing in the number that I'm reporting. That may not be possible. But a secondary benefit, of course, is achieving real-time, or as close to real-time as we can, is a further step along that goal of a single source of truth. If there's a time gap between the event and the data you get, then by definition, you haven't got a single source of truth with reality. Now, I know that gap might never reach zero, but the closer we can get it, the better we are. Quite obviously, and we've heard from Mike and Duncan about the desire from end users to be able to do ad hoc queries rather than pre-canned reports. And again, it's a dual benefit. It isn't just for the benefit of the end users, it's for the benefit of the organisations, because it takes a big administrative overhead off the data scientists to be producing those reports all the time. The more that you can, I'm not sure if this is a common phrase, but lots of the outsourcers use it, the more you can shift left, which fundamentally means you move the task leftwards to the end user rather than rightwards to your organisation, the happier they are, so long as the task is easier to do, and the happier you are, because you're not paying your very expensive and highly trained staff to do routine tasks. That allows. The third point, I think, is particularly interesting, because the corollary of that, I just pronounced that wrong, I think, is that that then means that the data exploration is being undertaken by the domain experts, i.e. the person who knows about health or the person who knows about education, rather than at one step removed by a data scientist. And that's really important. The reason that end users like those ad hoc queries is, one, because they're quicker, but also because they can go, oh no, but what about this? Oh, but what about that? Oh no, that would never happen, because I happen to know that in Victoria, hedgerows are only allowed to be that high because I'm the expert on hedgerows. Whereas if you've passed it off to someone who is a data scientist, with the best will in the world, they may not have that domain information unless you're continually going back and forth to them. So there's a huge benefit there in this ad hoc being able to query, being able to produce the reports yourself. Quite obviously, we've seen that you've got to be able to maintain the privacy of the information that you're reporting by obfuscation or abstraction or some sort of mechanism. And of course, the holy grail is to be able to do it through an API. Now, again, that's sort of at the moment that's early stages. A few people are getting to that point, and it was great to hear that DWP think that they're going down that road. But really, we've been with spreadsheets. We've sort of moved to online and dynamic type applications, the web type applications that we've seen that are fantastic. The next step, if you like, is to be able to access that data via API, but still maintain that security, privacy, and all of those concerns. So, to finish up, what's the potential of open data? Well, at the end of the day, governments, whether they be state, local, city, national, have huge data sets. As you all know, you're all managing them, you're all custodians for huge data sets, and they've all been collected at a large cost. So every additional use that we can get out of those data. I mean, the cost is sunk essentially in many of the data sets. The collection cost for the census is horrendous. All right, a little bit horrendous. It's a large amount of money, to collect the census data, but it's been collected. So every additional usage that we can get out of that data set is if you like, it's almost like a freebie from the investment that's already been made. And that will apply at a greater or a lesser extent to all the data sets that you deal with. So any data you've already collected is fantastic because the investment's already been made. Third bullet point, opening up data sets, and particularly government data sets, encourages innovative use that government can't afford to do. And, obviously the couple of examples of the travel app and the weather app, those are trivial examples. But there are lots and lots of other examples where really motivated individuals have used the government data to produce a society app or a benefit for that just government departments with limited budgets, limited resources, limited people would never be able to do. And we see that very often in the government hack forums that occur basically in every state now. I think they're in every state every year, where motivated geeks come together for 48 hours and hammer away at keyboards to try and produce an app for the public good that's based on government data. So that's happening all the time, and they're just things that government either wouldn't have the interest in, or couldn't afford to do, or couldn't afford to prioritise compared to all the other things that are important. So I think I'm just repeating myself there. I apologise for that, but reinforcing that we need to move from a published file model, which is the old view of the world, to an API model. So we're going to get as near as we can to real-time access, and I accept that may never be full real-time. We can get ad hoc queries from the software, and we can get convergence on a single source of truth. And as I think both the previous presentations highlighted, and they've highlighted some very interesting ways of solving it with the STR software, solving the privacy conundrum is the key to getting this insight into social services, so that hopefully we can see more examples of the positive benefit, like the state of Indiana, where we actually see some benefits for people in terms of health, education, and social welfare. So finally, I'll just finish up. Ovum does a lot of research on this topic, and I would emphasise that I'm the public sector analyst. I'm not the open data analyst. So there is an awful lot of research that we have from our research team. We've got 180 analysts around the world that are looking into these things all the time. If you're interested to getting any access to our research, have a chat to me, or have a chat to Taras, who's sitting over there on the table, and we can talk to you about that. So thanks for your time. I appreciate it. I'm the last speaker, and I hope I haven't held you up too long, but I'm happy to take questions, or I'll be here afterwards if you want to ask questions then. So thanks.